The massive Krexian warship Dominion's Edge floated silently through space, its dark metal hull reflecting the distant stars. Inside the ship's bridge, Commander Vextar studied the glowing screens that showed him everything about the small blue planet ahead. "Show me more of their communications," he ordered his crew. The main screen filled with images from Earth. Humans sat around tables, talking and arguing instead of fighting. Their leaders stood behind podiums, making speeches about peace and cooperation. Even their military forces seemed more interested in helping people than conquering enemies. Lieutenant Mordek shook his head in disbelief. "Commander, they actually have something called the United Nations where different groups try to solve problems by talking." Vextar's 4 eyes gleamed with amusement. In his long career, he had conquered dozens of worlds for the Krexian Empire. Every species they encountered followed the same pattern: the strong ruled the weak through fear and violence. These humans seemed different. They seemed soft. "What about their entertainment?" he asked. More images flashed across the screen. Movies showing humans helping each other during disasters. Stories about heroes who saved lives instead of taking them. Even their war movies ended with the characters finding peaceful solutions. Fascinating, Vextar clicked his mandibles together. They dream about violence but always choose to talk instead. Their warriors become peacekeepers. Their leaders debate instead of command. The intelligence officer, a younger Krexian named Torvek, pulled up more data. "Sir, we've analyzed their military communications. They spend more time on humanitarian missions than actual fighting. Food delivery, medical aid, disaster relief. And their weapons? Old technology, mostly. Primitive projectile weapons and chemical explosives. Nothing that could threaten our shields." Vextar leaned back in his command chair, satisfied. The humans fit perfectly into the Krexian playbook. They were a species that had grown comfortable and weak. Perfect candidates for intimidation tactics. The Krexian Empire had refined their conquest methods over centuries. Step 1, arrive with overwhelming force. Step 2, demand immediate surrender. Step 3, accept the submission of the terrified population. It worked every time because most species were smart enough to recognize when they were outmatched. "Signal the fleet," Vextar commanded. "All ships are to assume attack formation at the edge of their star system. Full weapon display. I want every gun pointed at their little planet." Within hours, 50 Krexian dreadnoughts emerged from hyperspace. Each ship was the size of a small city, bristling with plasma cannons and missile launchers. Their black hulls were designed to look threatening, covered in sharp angles and glowing weapon ports. The sight of them had caused entire civilizations to surrender without a fight. But something unexpected happened. Instead of panicked radio signals begging for mercy, a single small ship approached from Earth. It was tiny compared to the Krexian vessels, no bigger than a shuttle. It had no visible weapons and moved slowly, broadcasting on peaceful diplomatic frequencies. "This is Captain Lee Hyun of the Earth Diplomatic Corps," came a calm voice in accented but clear galactic standard. "We welcome you to our solar system and hope for peaceful contact between our peoples." The Krexian bridge crew looked at each other in surprise. Most species either attacked immediately or surrendered immediately when faced with their fleet. These humans were doing neither. Vextar activated his own communication system. "Human vessel, I am Commander Vextar of the Krexian Imperial Navy. You are looking at 50 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy. Your planet has exactly 24 hours to surrender completely, or we will demonstrate why no species has ever successfully resisted the Krexian Empire." There was a pause. Then Captain Lee's voice came back, still perfectly calm. "I will need to discuss this with my government, Commander. Please stand by while we review your offer." "Offer?" Vextar stared at the communication panel. The human had called his ultimatum an offer, as if they were negotiating a trade agreement instead of facing annihilation. "Sir," Mordek whispered, "they're treating this like a business meeting." For the next several hours, the Krexians monitored human communications across their planet. They expected to hear panic, fear, desperate military preparations. Instead, they heard calm discussions about diplomatic protocols and appropriate responses. Human news broadcasts talked about the alien arrival with curiosity rather than terror. Military channels discussed contingency plans without any sense of urgency. Most puzzling of all, civilian conversations seemed more annoyed than frightened. "They're not taking us seriously," Torvek reported. "Listen to this." He played an intercepted conversation between 2 human military officers. "So these Krexians want us to surrender in 24 hours? That's not how diplomacy works. Someone should explain proper first contact procedures to them. Vextar felt the first stirring of doubt. In all his years of conquest, he had never encountered a species that responded to overwhelming force with paperwork and procedure manuals. Maybe they're just slow to understand the situation, he told himself. When the deadline passes and they see our weapons in action, they'll become properly terrified. But deep in his mind, a small voice wondered if perhaps the Crexians had made their first real mistake in decades. These humans weren't acting like any conquered species he had ever seen. They weren't acting afraid at all. As the hours ticked by toward the deadline, more strange reports came in. Human civilian populations weren't fleeing to shelters. Their military wasn't scrambling to defensive positions. Instead, both groups seemed to be calmly preparing for something. The question was, preparing for what? Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, Admiral Park Jin-woo stood in a room that officially did not exist. The command center was built inside an underwater mountain, hidden from satellites and enemy sensors. Around him, dozens of officers worked at glowing screens, their faces lit by the soft blue light of tactical displays. "Show me the alien fleet again," Park ordered quietly. Major Kim So-young pressed a button, and the main screen filled with images of the 50 Crexian ships. They hung in space like dark metal sharks, their weapons pointed toward Earth. "They're using classic intimidation tactics," reported Captain Han Yijin from her intelligence station. "Big ships, scary appearance, demands for immediate surrender. It's worked for them on 17 different worlds." Park nodded slowly. He was 62 years old and had spent his entire adult life preparing for this exact moment. Not the peaceful first contact that the diplomats had hoped for, but the violent encounter that the military had always expected. "What do we know about their technology?" he asked. Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Dae-hai pulled up detailed scans. "Their weapons are impressive but designed more for show than efficiency. Lots of bright lights and loud explosions, perfect for scaring primitive species into giving up. Their ships are big but not particularly well armored. And their tactics? Simple and effective against weak opponents. They show up, make threats, accept surrender, move on to the next target. They've never had to actually fight a real war." Park walked over to another screen showing intercepted alien communications. The Crexian commander seemed confident, even amused by humanity's diplomatic response. The aliens clearly thought they were dealing with another easy conquest. They were about to learn otherwise. For 30 years, ever since humanity had first detected signs of aggressive alien civilizations, Earth's military had been preparing. Not with hope for peace, but with grim determination to survive whatever came from the stars. Every mining operation, every space station, every seemingly innocent research facility had been designed with one purpose: turning humanity's solar system into the galaxy's most dangerous place to pick a fight. "Signal Captain Lee," Park commanded. "Give him the response." 12 hours after the Crexian ultimatum, the small diplomatic ship broadcast back to the alien fleet. Captain Lee Hyun's voice was still calm and professional, as if he were discussing the weather. "Commander Vextar, our government has carefully reviewed your ultimatum. We respectfully decline your offer. Instead, we have a counter-proposal. You have 12 hours to leave our solar system peacefully. If you choose to remain, your presence will be considered an act of war against Earth and all her colonies." On the bridge of the Dominion's edge, the Crexian crew stared at their communication equipment in shock. "Did they just threaten us?" whispered Lieutenant Mordek. Commander Vextar replayed the message 3 times, certain he had misunderstood something. No species facing 50 dreadnoughts had ever issued their own ultimatum. It was impossible. It had to be a bluff. But as the hours passed, more disturbing information reached the Crexian fleet. Human military channels buzzed with activity, not panicked screaming, but calm, professional coordination. News broadcasts discussed something called Protocol 7 and solar defense grid activation without any sense of fear. Most troubling were the historical records they intercepted. These peaceful humans had fought something called World War II, where they had battled enemies on 6 different continents simultaneously while developing weapons capable of destroying entire cities. Another conflict called the Korean War showed them fighting in conditions that would kill most alien species. "Commander," the sensor officer called out nervously, "we're detecting movement throughout the system." Vextar rushed to the sensor station. "What kind of movement?" "Electromagnetic signatures. Lots of them. They're coming from everywhere." The tactical display began filling with red dots. At first just a few, then dozens, then hundreds of contacts appearing throughout the solar system. They emerged from asteroid fields where nothing should have been able to hide. They rose from the crushing atmospheres of gas giant planets. They separated from the dark sides of moons where their heat signatures had been invisible. How many? Vextar asked in a whisper. 243 confirmed contacts, sir. And the number is still growing. What had seemed like 50 Krexian ships facing an empty, defenseless system now looked very different. The humans had somehow hidden an entire fleet throughout their solar system, waiting in powered-down silence for exactly this moment. This has to be their entire military, Mordek said desperately. They've left their homeworld completely defenseless for this bluff. But intercepted human communications suggested otherwise. Military officers spoke casually about First Fleet and Home Defense Grid, implying that this massive force was just their local garrison, not their total military strength. Even more disturbing were the civilian broadcasts. Instead of terror and panic, the Krexians detected curiosity, anger, and something their translation computers labeled as eager anticipation. Human news reporters spoke excitedly about finally getting to see the new defense systems in action. Children were setting up lemonade stands to support the war effort. Factory workers volunteered for overtime shifts to increase weapons production. Retirement homes reported elderly veterans trying to re-enlist. These weren't the actions of a terrified population. These were the actions of predators who had been waiting for someone to give them an excuse. Sir, the communications officer called out, we're receiving a new transmission from the human admiral. Admiral Park's image appeared on their screen, an older man with gray hair and cold, calculating eyes. Commander Vextar, you have 6 hours remaining to accept our generous offer of safe passage from our system. I suggest you use this time wisely. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. General Nam Sujin watched the tactical display from her command bunker deep beneath the mountains of Korea. Red dots representing Krexian ships were scattered across the screen, while blue dots showed human forces moving into attack positions. She had waited 30 years for this moment. All stealth systems are now offline, reported Colonel Seo Junho. The aliens can see everything we've been hiding. The transformation was remarkable. What had appeared to be an empty solar system just hours ago now revealed its true nature. Human warships emerged from behind asteroids where they had waited in complete silence. Others rose from the poisonous atmospheres of gas giant planets, their hulls scarred but intact. Some detached themselves from the dark sides of moons, where they had looked like natural rock formations. The Krexians had walked into the most elaborate trap in human history. On the bridge of the Dominion's edge, Commander Vextar stared at his senses in growing horror. The numbers kept climbing. 300 human vessels. 400. 500. His 50 ships were now outnumbered 10 to 1. How is this possible? He demanded. Our intelligence said they were peaceful. Lieutenant Mordek was frantically reviewing their data. Sir, we may have misunderstood their broadcasts. When humans talked about keeping the peace, they weren't talking about avoiding war. They were talking about being ready for it. More disturbing information poured in from intercepted communications. Human military officers casually discussed Scenario Alpha and Full Deployment Protocol, as if they had practiced this exact situation hundreds of times. Because they had. What the Krexians had mistaken for weakness was actually careful preparation. Every human mining operation in the asteroid belt was also a weapons platform. Every research station around the gas giants was also a military base. Every merchant ship carried enough hidden firepower to destroy a city. Commander, his intelligence officer called out, you need to see this. On the screen appeared footage from human cities. Instead of people hiding in bunkers, the streets were filled with crowds cheering and celebrating. Children waved flags while their parents signed up for military service. Factory workers were volunteering for extra shifts to build more weapons. A human news reporter stood in front of what looked like a recruitment center. This is the largest volunteer response in human history, she said excitedly. Military officials report they have more people wanting to join the fight than they can possibly process. Vextar felt his confidence cracking. These weren't the actions of a frightened species. These were the actions of warriors who had been hoping someone would give them a reason to fight. Sir, the sensor officer interrupted, the human fleet is moving into attack formation. The tactical display showed human ships arranging themselves in a perfect sphere around the Krexian fleet. Every escape route was blocked. Every angle of attack was covered. It was the work of military minds that understood space combat better than the Krexians had ever imagined possible. Desperate to salvage the situation, Vextar made a decision that would haunt him forever. Target that mining station in the asteroid belt, he ordered. One demonstration of our power will end this madness. The mining station never had a chance. Krexian plasma cannons turned it into a ball of fire and metal fragments. But as the station died, its automated defense systems activated with mechanical precision. Hidden missile launchers that the Krexians hadn't even detected opened fire. 2 Krexian destroyers exploded before they realized they were under attack. The response from Earth was immediate and terrifying. Admiral Park's voice came across all frequencies, cold as winter wind. You have fired the first shot and killed innocent civilians. The 12-hour deadline no longer applies. Surrender immediately or face complete destruction. As if humanity had been waiting for exactly that excuse. Captain Lim Yojin piloted her stealth corvette through the debris of the destroyed mining station, her weapons already locked onto the nearest Krexian ship. Around her, hundreds of human vessels began their attack with deadly precision. The Krexians had expected to face primitive chemical rockets and metal bullets. Instead, they encountered directed energy weapons that sliced through their armor like paper. Kinetic impactors struck with the force of small meteors. Electronic warfare systems turned their own computers against them. Worse yet, the humans fought with a coordination that spoke of decades of training. They moved like parts of a single mind, each ship supporting the others in perfect harmony. The Krexians, used to easy victories against terrified enemies, found themselves completely outmatched. Status report. Vextar shouted over the sound of alarms on his bridge. 15 ships destroyed, 23 damaged, Mordek reported in a shaking voice. Sir, their weapons are far more advanced than our intelligence suggested. Through the chaos, intercepted human communications painted a picture that chilled Vextar to his core. Human officers were discussing the battle like a training exercise. They talked about testing new weapon systems and gathering combat data, as if the destruction of the Krexian fleet was just a useful learning experience. One transmission made his blood run cold. A human captain reported to his commander, Admiral, the new plasma torpedoes are working perfectly. Request permission to try the experimental gravity mines. Experimental weapons. The humans weren't even using their best technology yet. As more Krexian ships died around him, Vextar finally understood the terrible mistake his empire had made. They hadn't invaded a peaceful world of weak diplomats. They had attacked the home system of a species that had spent decades preparing for this exact moment. The humans hadn't been hiding their strength out of fear. They had been hiding it out of mercy, giving aggressive species like the Krexians a chance to choose diplomacy over destruction. That chance was now over. Captain Lim Yojin's fingers danced across her ship's controls as she guided her corvette through the wreckage of what had once been a proud Krexian battle cruiser. Pieces of twisted metal and frozen atmosphere drifted past her view screen like deadly snow. Her crew worked with quiet efficiency, hunting for escape pods among the debris. 3 more survivors detected, reported Lieutenant Bae Suho from his tactical station. They're trying to reach that damaged destroyer. Intercept course, Lim ordered. Send them the standard message. The message was simple and had been repeated hundreds of times in the past 6 hours. Surrender and prepare to be boarded, or be destroyed. No one leaves this system until the fighting is finished. Around them, the one-sided battle continued with mechanical precision. Human ships moved through space like hunting wolves, coordinating their attacks through quantum communication systems the Krexians couldn't even detect. What had started as 50 proud Krexian dreadnoughts was now reduced to burning metal and desperate survivors. The aliens had come expecting to face a primitive species armed with crude weapons and simple tactics. Instead, they found directed energy cannons that carved through their strongest armor, kinetic missiles that struck with the force of asteroids, and electronic warfare systems that turned their own ships against them. On the crippled bridge of the Dominion's edge, Commander Vextar listened to the chaos on his communication channels. Half his fleet was gone, and the humans showed no signs of slowing their methodical destruction. How? He whispered to his intelligence officer. How did we miss all of this? The answer lay in their own intercepted data. For 30 years, humanity had maintained a careful illusion. Their mining operations were actually weapons platforms. Their research stations were military bases. Their merchant vessels carried enough hidden firepower to destroy planets. But the deception went deeper than anyone had imagined. The humans had deliberately broadcast their most peaceful communications while hiding their military preparations. They had wanted potential enemies to underestimate them, to give humanity the advantage of surprise. Sir, his sensor officer called out desperately, another group of our ships is trying to escape toward the jump point. On his tactical display, Vextar watched 12 damaged Krexian vessels racing toward the edge of the system, hoping to reach hyperspace before the humans could stop them. they never made it. Human interceptor squadrons appeared from nowhere, moving faster than anything the Crexians had ever seen. The escape attempt ended in more explosions and debris. What terrified Vextar most was how calmly the humans fought. Intercepted communications showed their officers discussing the battle like it was a training exercise. They talked about testing weapon effectiveness and gathering combat data, as if destroying the Crexian fleet was just useful practice. One transmission made his blood freeze. A human destroyer captain reported to his admiral, "Sir, the new gravity torpedoes worked perfectly. The Crexian shields had no defense against gravitational distortion. Recommend full production." They were using the battle to test experimental weapons. But it wasn't just the military that shocked the Crexians. Civilian broadcasts from Earth showed a population that wasn't cowering in fear but celebrating like their team had won a sporting event. Children held up signs saying "Welcome to Earth" with pictures of exploding alien ships. Teenagers sold snacks to raise money for the war effort. Most disturbing was an interview with an elderly human woman. When asked if she was afraid of the alien invasion, she laughed. "Afraid? Honey, I lived through the Second World War and the Korean conflict. These aliens picked a fight with the wrong species. We've been getting ready for this day since we first looked at the stars." The Crexians realized they hadn't attacked a peaceful civilization. They had attacked a planet of warriors who had been pretending to be diplomats. "Commander," his communications officer announced, "Admiral Park is broadcasting on all frequencies." The human leader's image filled their screen. Park looked older than before, his gray hair and lined face showing the weight of command. But his eyes were cold as Arctic wind. To all surviving Crexian vessels, he began in perfect galactic standard. "You came to our system with threats and violence. You destroyed our people and our property. Now you face the consequences of your actions." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I offer you one final choice. Surrender immediately and you will be treated according to the laws of war. Your wounded will receive medical care. Your survivors will be returned to your empire with a message. Continue fighting, and every one of your ships will be destroyed where it floats." It wasn't mercy. It was a predator giving its prey one last chance before the killing blow. Around the system, the few remaining Crexian ships received the message. Most began broadcasting surrender signals immediately. A handful tried to fight on and were destroyed within minutes. Commander Vextar stared at his tactical display, watching the last of his proud fleet either surrender or die. In 6 hours, the mighty Crexian Imperial Navy had been reduced to wreckage and prisoners. "Sir," Mordek asked quietly, "what do we do?" Vextar looked around his damaged bridge. Half his crew was dead or wounded. His ship's weapons were destroyed. His engines were failing. The humans had shown they could destroy him whenever they chose. "Send the surrender signal," he said finally. "And prepare a full report for the Empire. They need to know what we've learned here." What they had learned was simple and terrifying. Humanity didn't just fight to win. They fought to teach lessons. And the lesson was clear: some species were too dangerous to threaten and too powerful to defeat. The age of easy Crexian conquests was over. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, Ambassador Chohyrin walked into the Galactic Council chambers with quiet confidence. The massive room buzzed with nervous conversations in dozens of alien languages as representatives from across the galaxy watched her approach the central podium. The chamber had changed since humanity's dramatic entrance into galactic politics. Where once the Crexian Empire's representatives had sat in places of honor, now empty seats reminded everyone of a civilization that had crumbled almost overnight. Other aggressive species had quietly moved their delegations to less prominent positions. "Honored representatives," Cho began, her words automatically translated into every language in the room, "the Earth government wishes to establish formal diplomatic relations with all peaceful civilizations. We offer trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, and mutual defense treaties." She paused, letting her next words carry the weight of recent history. "For those who choose friendship over conquest." Behind her, the massive wall display showed footage from the Battle of Sol. 50 proud Crexian dreadnoughts had entered the human solar system 6 months ago. Only 8 had left, carrying survivors and a message that had shaken the entire galaxy. The message was simple: Earth was no longer hiding. In the months following the battle, the galaxy had learned uncomfortable truths about humanity. They hadn't been weak during those early decades of contact. They had been patient. They hadn't been unprepared for war. They had been hoping to avoid it while secretly preparing for the worst possible outcome. Representative Kolvash of the Centauran Trade Federation raised one of his 4 arms. "Ambassador Cho, our intelligence services are concerned about reports of human military expansion. Your exploration fleets carry weapons capable of destroying continents. Cho nodded calmly. That's correct, Representative. Our exploration vessels are equipped for any situation they might encounter. We've learned that the galaxy can be a dangerous place for those who aren't prepared to defend themselves. She touched a control on her podium, and new images appeared on the wall display. Human ships were indeed spreading across the galaxy, but they weren't conquering worlds. Instead, they were establishing embassies, setting up trade routes, and offering protection to smaller civilizations. We carry big sticks, Cho continued with a slight smile, but we prefer to speak softly. The reference was lost on most of the alien delegates, but they understood the meaning. Humanity had proven they could destroy anyone who threatened them, but they preferred to make friends instead of enemies. From her seat in the Krexian section, former Fleet Commander Yathak stood slowly. She was one of only 12 Krexian military officers to survive the battle, and her presence served as a living reminder of what happened to those who underestimated humanity. I must speak, Yathak said, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. My empire sent 50 warships to conquer what we thought was a weak, peaceful world. We learned too late that humans don't show their strength until they need to use it. She gestured toward the display showing human exploration ships. Those vessels could glass any planet in this room. But instead of conquest, they offer treaties. Instead of demands, they offer choices. My people mistook this for weakness. We paid the price for that mistake. The truth was even more dramatic than Yathak knew. The Krexian Empire had begun falling apart within weeks of the battle. Subject species that had been held down by Krexian military might suddenly realize their oppressors weren't invincible. Rebellions broke out across dozens of worlds. Within months, the mighty Krexian Empire had fragmented into a dozen smaller states. Other aggressive civilizations had taken note. The Vorthan hegemony quietly cancelled their expansion plans and sent diplomatic envoys to Earth. The Zephyrian war clans signed non-aggression pacts without being asked. Even the mysterious Void Dwellers sent messages expressing their desire for peaceful contact. But it wasn't just fear that drove the galaxy's new attitude toward humanity. Human technology, hidden for decades, was suddenly available for trade. Medical advances that could extend lifespans by centuries. Environmental restoration techniques that could bring dead worlds back to life. Energy systems that could power entire civilizations cleanly and efficiently. The choice is simple, Ambassador Cho explained to the assembled delegates. Work with us, and prosper together. Threaten us or our allies, and face the consequences alone. She activated another display showing a map of human expansion. Blue dots marked friendly colonies and allied worlds. Green lines showed trade routes bringing prosperity to dozens of species. The galaxy was becoming more peaceful and prosperous than it had been in centuries. But red zones marked areas where aggressive species still operated. These regions found themselves increasingly isolated as their neighbors chose human friendship over continued conflict. We don't seek to rule the galaxy, Cho continued. We seek to protect it. From those who would harm the innocent, from those who profit from war and suffering, and from those who believe might makes right. As the session ended, delegates approached the human ambassador with offers of cooperation. Trade deals, defense agreements, cultural exchange programs. The galaxy was reshaping itself around humanity's simple philosophy: be nice, and we'll be nice back. Be hostile, and face the consequences. Deep in space, human exploration vessels continued their mission of mapping new worlds and making new friends. Each ship carried both olive branches and enough firepower to crack moons. The message was clear to everyone they encountered: humanity offered partnership to those who wanted it, and destruction to those who insisted on war. Admiral Park Jin-woo, now retired but still influential, had summed it up perfectly in his final report. We spent 30 years preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. Now the galaxy knows that humans keep their promises, whether those promises are friendship or warfare. The age of human expansion had begun, not through conquest but through the simple demonstration that some species were too valuable as friends and too dangerous as enemies. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson in human history: humans don't bluff.